Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Seward. I'm the Water Program Advisor for the Water Resources Branch in the Government of Yukon. So today I am sharing this video with you. It is about a 10-minute video which outlines the contents of the Yukon Guide for Developing Water Quality Objectives and Effluent Quality Standards. This video is meant to provide an introduction to these guidelines. If you would like a more technical deep dive into these guidelines, please look at our other video. It's about an hour long and goes through different frameworks, implementation procedures, and methodologies more in depth. So this is just an overview, and please enjoy. So why did we make this video? We made this video sort of as an experiment. It's we don't typically do videos like this, but due to COVID and the fact that everyone is busy and sort of at capacity right now, we wanted to make a video that people could access at their leisure. So we did this as just an additional component or supporting piece for engaging on these guidelines. So we're hoping to answer any preliminary questions folks may have on the water quality objectives and quality standards. And the guide is out for public review right now, so we want to hear what you think. As you may know, we sent out the guideline package in earlier this year with sort of a soft timeline. Now we're hoping to sort of set some boundaries on the timeline and give a period of 60 days from the date of sending this package for folks to provide their feedback or any questions they may have. After that, we hope to finalize the guidelines and release them likely in late 2020. So along with myself, I will be joined by Bill Slater of Slater Environmental, who will give an overview of the guide, as well as Emily Janin, who is the Senior Scientist of Water Quality in the Water Resources Branch, who will give an implementation plan for the guide. So to start, I'm going to go over why this guide is important. We're going to hear from a few folks from the working group. We're going to give a background on the origin of the guide, what the Mine License Improvement Initiative is, who the guide will be used for, and how the guide will be used to improve water management. We will also touch on what the engagement process will involve, as well as the components of the guide and implementation processes so far. So why this guide is important. So below you'll hear from a few folks that are in the technical working group that have been really key in developing these guidelines. So thanks for all those group members for providing their input on why these guidelines are so important. So to start, the guidelines were initiated in 2015 through the Mine License Improvement Initiative, which was put together, the whole initiative was put together in 2014 and has resulted in various different projects that aim to produce more clarity and efficiency around water management and management of mines. So who has been involved in this process? So thus far, there's been a variety of technical working group members from departments and branches across the Government of Yukon. YESAB and the Yukon Water Board Secretariat have also been involved, as well as the First Nations Mining Caucus. So later on, Bill Slater will describe how these folks were involved and what roles they played. So a bit more on the Mine License Improvement Initiative, which we call MLE. So it was started in 2014, as I said, and it intends to provide better protection of the environment and encourage responsible development. It is also designed to reduce overlap and improve coordination and effectiveness of authorization of major projects in relation to the regulated use of water or deposit of waste into water. And also it's aimed to provide clarity and effective interagency coordination. So there's multiple players who typically work on these types of projects, and it is our hope that through these guidelines, it will assist in making sort of streamlining and coordinating many processes to make environmental management more effective. So some key definitions. So what exactly are effluent quality standards? So these EQSs are defined as a maximum allowable concentration of a contaminant of potential concern that can be released into the environment as effluent. These are standards usually defined in the water use license. So these are a bit different than water quality objectives, which are defined as acceptable water quality conditions in receiving waters that may be affected by a project based on the sensitivity of the aquatic ecosystems to contaminants of potential concern. So as I said, we sent out a package in early May with most of the contents or the contents that are related to these guidelines. We didn't put a deadline on this package, and now we would like to put a few boundaries onto the engagement timeline. So from this period, we're asking for 60 days, and then asking folks to have an input to Amli Janin within a 60-day period. So now Bill will give an overview of the guidelines.
All but the initial complete version. I guess I'll provide, first of all, a bit of a rundown of kind of the timeline of development of this. As Emma mentioned, the project began in 2015. We developed an initial guide by early 2016 and discussed that with the water board. And based on that input, then developed a more refined version of the guide by 2017, and that went out for public review and discussion and engagement, and also out for a third-party expert review with environmental. We held a couple of workshops, a multi-party workshop, and also a separate workshop with First Nation Caucus during 2017. And we spent 2018 making revisions and doing some analysis to understand what we needed to change in the guide, and produce a revised guide by early 2019, along with what we heard document and rationale for the baseline data requirements, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment or two. Through 2019, we also had some discussions with First Nations through the mining MOU table, and sent the revised guide out for another third-party expert review. And based on input during those processes, revised the guide further in November of 2019, which has led us to where we are now, with further engagement on this now twice updated guide since the version that went out in 2017. During that 2017 engagement, we received feedback from a fairly broad range of groups: industry, First Nations, governments, the water board, of course, and YESA were involved in as Emma mentioned, in the committees that were working on development of the guide. We had feedback from consulting companies, from non-government organizations. Some of the key issues that came up, there was a lot of feedback about the requirements for baseline data requirements, which were established as a requirement for 3 years of data. And so there were concerns in both directions about that, whether that was too much of a requirement or whether it was not enough. We, in 2018, went through some extensive analysis of statistical analysis of data from natural streams to get a better understanding of how we could understand baseline data, and made some minor changes to those data requirements in the revised guide. And we think we have a strong rationale for the basis we have now put in there. And of course, that's reflected in a document that we put out responding to the feedback we received, called the What We Heard report. We also had a fair bit of feedback about the decision-making process with respect to water management approaches, and we made some changes in that as well with respect to the criteria that would be required for defining water management approaches. Similar feedback on requirements related to a similar capacity, and not an extensive amount of feedback on the details of the methods for water quality objective development. So I will talk a little bit about the key components of the guide now that I've talked about the process of getting there and some of the feedback we received on the earlier versions. I will mention that the objective set out in 2015, 2016 was to provide more clarity and certainty about processes for establishing water quality objectives and effluent quality standards for hard rock mining projects in Yukon. And so the guide aims to do that. It, as it says in the front of the guide, it supports the government's need to try and balance multiple priorities while providing enhanced certainty for regulated quartz mining uses. So hopefully it achieves an effective balance in that way. The guide does establish some key principles that help to interpret how the guide should be applied. For example, that we want to maintain natural conditions in water bodies as a preferred water management goal, while still recognizing that there may be reasons for using water in ways that might affect the goal. And also that we expect application of reasonable and practical measures to reduce pollution before we set off on a path to developing site-specific water quality objectives, for example. So the guide, as laid out on this slide here, describes kind of a systematic process for developing and implementing water quality objectives and deriving effluent quality standards. And the broad steps are listed here, basically steps as points 2 through 6 on this slide, where first of all, we're determining a water management approach. And this, really, for example, are we looking at not degrading water, or are we looking at protecting water quality for use by fish, for example? And that's a unique component of Yukon's guidance. And it reflects the first principle that I just mentioned in relation to sort of interpretation of the guide. And then we move on to identifying contaminants of concern that might be present from a particular mining project, and selecting the appropriate water quality objectives procedures, which are described in the guide. There's 5 different sort of procedures described, and using those to develop the water quality objectives. And then I outline in the guide, how do we measure attainment of those objectives, and how do we validate whether they are being effective as we had expected them to be. And finally, the guide describes how do we develop effluent quality standards, which are the kind of end of pipe discharge standards for a mine, and those are based on calculations of available dilution between the stream and the effluent discharge location. So I think that provides a quick overview of what the guide contains and how we got to where we did.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about implementation of the guide and basically how things are going to roll out. So one thing which is important to note is that water quality objectives are being developed using the 3 years of baseline data that we recommend, and they are being presented to YESAB for the assessment of the project. During assessment of the project by YESAB, we do identify preliminary effluent quality standards, or EQS. And the EQS may be derived at that stage where it's relevant. And after the project has been assessed by YESAB, the proponent then submits a license application to the Yukon Water Board. At that time, at the time of the submission of the application, we expect to see updated water quality objectives that are developed based on the whole data that we have acquired to date, so the whole water quality data set. During the water licensing stage, this is where the standards, the effluent quality standards, are being defined, and this is a decision made by the board, the Yukon Water Board, and it is laid out in the license as a result of the licensing process. Both YESAB and the Yukon Water Board were involved in some capacity in the development of this guide, or actually I should say the staff from YESAB and the staff from the Water Board Secretariat were involved into the development of this guide from the very beginning. So we expect and we are we expect that both the assessors and the licensing officers are going to use the guide, as well as Yukon government. When we review project at either stage, we are going to use the guide at the same time. So if we go to the next slide. So basically the guide is really laying out our expectations for how we want the proponent to develop water quality objective and effluent quality standard. So if the proponent are following the guide, everything is good, and we should have good water quality objective and effluent quality standard in the end. If the proponent decide not to follow the guide, then there will be higher scrutiny into why there was deviation from the guide. And so really we are trying to have clear message to the proponent on what it is that we are expecting. The working group was tasked to develop a guide that was specifically for quartz mining projects, but we do recognize that that could be relevant to other undertaking, other types of activities that may affect water quality, but the guide is strictly right now focused on mining. So that concludes this short overview. Again, we did prepare a longer video, and I really encourage you to look at the longer video if you want to, or to send this short video and the long video to the people who will provide the review. Any feedback that you have on this, please send them my way. So my name is Amélie Janin, and you can find my email address in the package that you have received. So I really want to thank you for your time in listening to this video, and hopefully the time that you will be spending to review this guide and providing feedback to us. We really, really want to hear from everybody and from the people who are involved into developing water quality objective and standards. So we are really eager to hear from you. Thank you, everyone.